save? What should you save? That's a big question. Some people would look at this and say, some of this is garbage. That's garbage, that's garbage. Some of us would look at it and say treasure. And it's a subjective question. What is historically relevant? I will, if you saw my presentation a year ago about the 5 top sites, you saw this part, but I had to really think about, okay, what do I think is historically relevant since I'm the one doing the talk. I would argue that there are 3 categories here, and I think these items fit into those. One is it represents some era that came and went, or will come and go. An example is, we have in our archives the top 8 feet of this windmill. This is the one that was where that senior living is on North Main, north of the cemetery. That's an era that's gone, you know, using the wind power to provide water for your cattle on your farm. Or right now, we have some of these homemade COVID masks to try to capture what this weird couple of years has been like. That's going to be gone at some point, right? Right. Okay, an era that hopefully will be gone. I would say too, something that represents a change over time, or something that caused a change. The example I thought of was, we have a lot of our own Indian stuff. It's one thing to just say, we used to be the Indians. But what I like about these objects is it lets you look at them and really focus on, how was this image looked at in 1950? How was it looked at in 2020? And you kind of get that feel for how things change in the culture of our community over time. So to me, that makes it relevant. Or, obviously, represents a specific person or important event, like the pen that Lincoln signed the Gettysburg Address with, or wrote it with. That would be relevant the moment he signed it. An example would be, we don't have that roof, no. You know, that one didn't make the cut, I left that one at home. We just bought the important stuff. Thank you. So for example, we have the shovel, one of the shovels that was used when the high school ground broke, I think 2017, 2018-ish. So I grabbed that sucker right after this picture was taken. I got permission, don't worry. But that's, you know, historically relevant because it represents an important event for Verona. You'll notice it doesn't have to be old. I would argue that this mask and this shovel were historically relevant the moment they were used. But it helps. It helps though. If something's 100 years old, that makes it cooler in a way. But it's not necessary to be historically relevant. Where do we get it from? Often, I'm just contacted. So I run our email, our Facebook. Like the World War II vouchers you're going to see. I just get an email or a cold call saying, hey, often it's because someone's relative passed on and they're going through things, or they think they're going to, and they say, we have these World War II vouchers, would you be interested? And I said, yeah, I've never seen those in real life. So people find us. We've also built relationships. We know Dean Gorell real well, the previous superintendent. He did a presentation about the tornado at Country View for us. And when he was moving out, he donated a whole ton of stuff from the archives that he was kind of keeping at the school district. Also, we go after stuff. Duncan helped me pull this brick out of the ruins of the Gordon School and this wallpaper. I got permission last month to go into Sugar Creek building, which is there a little piece of that left? I've been watching it every day. I think we're down to just the step room area. And there's some stuff we found in there. So we actually go after stuff too, actively, which I think is a little bit different. When we kind of reformed in 06, we had the Gordon quilt, but I think our goal was not to amass artifacts, if I remember correctly. Then we kind of changed that in 2015 to say, we got to save some of this stuff from the dumpster and recognize it. So that's where we get it from. Where is it? Where are they stored? Most of the things that we collected in the 80s, when we were around for a brief stint in the 80s, we kind of took the 90s off to relax, then we came back in 2000s. A lot of our, I'm paraphrasing Ruth, a lot of our artifacts are in a back storage room at the library, including things that have come into them in the decades since. And there we are sorting it back in, I think 2016, there's Doreen Stewart identifying a whole bunch of people on an old class photo with Lord Lee Pulver. The rest of it, everything since 2015, I store as the president. So we've invested in some racks, some storage materials. We're going to be upgrading this stuff soon to get rid of some of this plastic, which isn't a really good long-term strategy. But this is a shot of some of the artifacts that I store as president, and I tend to. And when we get our display space, our museum, there's wheels on this stuff, it's all going to just roll right over there. So that's where it is for now.
And you'll have to take it up the stairs, but other than that...
We do have stairs, we have to take it up. That's right, Duncan. We'll roll it and we'll lift it. Volunteers for that, by the way. Anyone willing to help us? Yeah, Mom.
You have the most tolerant wife in the world.
I do have the most tolerant wife in the world, too. I took a gamble when we were doing the asylum cemetery preservation, and I had to sample planting one of the stones in our backyard to make sure it would stay through a winter. That's when I found out I had a tolerant wife, when I had a asylum headstone in my backyard, which is now back where it belongs, but that was the test. I love that story. Let's dive in. Yes?
best Halloween ever though for the mayor.
Cute, yeah.
So what I did was, I've been thinking about what are 12 interesting, kind of eye-catching or important artifacts we could show you all today and kind of let you come. And by the way, if your hands are clean, touch the stuff. This isn't the Smithsonian. If you have clean hands and you want to spin the wheel on this, I mean, I did protect some of the things that are super fragile, but I would love for one of the kids to come and ring this bell when you find out what that is. And this, I actually ended up with 12, so I lied. It's not the top 10. It was just too hard to make some cuts. And I think we're going to go down the list. So feel free to stop me with your questions or comments. And corrections, please. A lot of you have personal connections to some of these items. Let me know if I get something wrong. And I'll have Andy go and edit it out later, so I said it right. No, just kidding. Number one, I think, in my opinion, the most important artifacts we have in our entire collection are Native American projectile points and stone tools. The Native Americans resided in Verona for 12,000 years before US settlers got here, and we've been here for a couple hundred. So like, that's a lot of human history. And for that massive amount of time, we have almost nothing from them. If you want to go and put your hand on something that they did, or was part of their life, we have an Indian mound over by the Davidson House by the Sugar River. There is another one on a fence line a little bit north of there, and then there's these arrowheads. And I don't know if you have ever looked into this, it's pretty phenomenal how these were made and what they were used for. I mean, they were tools to provide life and a way of life to your family. We didn't have any arrowheads, and I say arrowheads, but really projectile points would be more accurate because some of these are for darts and spears that were used for hunting purposes. We didn't have any of these until last year when two people donated them, and they're both in this room. Kathy Matz there, Kathy, put your hand up, and Art, who had a line on our second collection. And where did those collections come from? Well, the Matz farm, which is on the corner of Locust and Main Street, Bill Matz, who, Kathy, your uncle, or, sorry?
Dad, it's my dad.
Oh, your dad, I'm sorry,
My dad.
up too late last night, my brain isn't working.
Right.
So Bill Matz, Kathy's dad, would collect these projectile points as he was farming there. And he collected over 50 of them, and the Matz family donated them to us last year. And they're an amazing array of examples from that area. Then the other question we have came in, if anyone knew this person, please let me know. There was a fellow named Jerry Warner who lived on Purcell Road up until the 90s, I think. He was buddies with Jim Davis, who's still in Verona across the street. Jerry gave these arrowheads to Jim, who then gave them to Art later on. And they came to us. And I've interviewed Jim. I can't find Jerry Warner on any of the maps. I found a Warner in that area, but if anyone has a lead on that, I'd like to talk to some of his family. But they're an awesome collection as well of these projectile points. We sat down with our buddy Paul Reckner, who is an archaeologist who has volunteered for us in the past. And by the way, I brought in these three here that we had on display at the Matz house in November, if you want to come to see them. He kind of eyeballed them, so he's led dozens of digs in the Verona area. And he gave me his initial thoughts. This is the Matz collection from Bill. And by the way, I'm going to disclaim this. These were his quick examinations. He'd really need to sit down and study them to know, but he thought these were preforms, which is where the individuals started chipping away and for some reason got interrupted, quit, stopped. This one at the top he thought was not local. It was not a material he'd seen in his studies in Verona. This group he wasn't sure, you could tell they're human made. And to me, I'm like, how do you know a human made this? It didn't just fall and get chipped. Well, when someone repetitively chips and chips and chips, you get this little rhythmic paper like grooves, or rhythmic pattern like grooves in a record almost, and you can tell. That didn't happen naturally. There were some that were clearly scrapers, so removing flesh from hides. What he called preforms, other unfinished arrowheads. These ones, he couldn't tell what they were for because there wasn't enough of the base of them, the flute, to examine. But this bottom row, he said, are very recognizable types of typical Wisconsin projectile points. And if someone studied these, could probably really tell where they were from, when they were from. There's enough evidence left on them. So that was really, really exciting when he came over. Also, these ones, he could even tell they were points that were used as a projectile and then remade, because they didn't waste anything. If something broke or chipped, you'd come and you'd use it for maybe a knife or a scraper. Yeah, Ruth. Yeah, Ruth was there too when Paul came.
You can tell them how long it takes to make one of those, Paul thought. Or, I mean, he has pretty good research on it.
This was shocking. I'm like, Paul, gosh, after you spend hours or days on one of these and you shoot off into the woods, you must be really depressed. He goes, these took minutes to make. Said people who do them in modern times, using the same techniques they think they were used, it takes longer to first you take a chunk of rock off of an outcropping, maybe the Sugar River, then you take it back to your camp. But when you get a little piece, he said it's 8 to 10 minutes, someone can pound these things out. Is that how you remember it too, Ruth? Which I was shocked by. I thought you'd spend, oh my goodness. And you're hitting it with bone or something softer, which doesn't make sense. How do you carve stone with bone? But he said if you carve it with something, if you hit it with something equally hard, you're gonna break it apart. But something with a finely point antler or bone, you could actually chip little pieces off of the rock. Fascinating stuff. Wow, and 3 of these are up here right now. He actually did spot 4 of them that were just either chips. He said when you make these, you leave a huge pile of refuse, and they'll find those piles and know there's a camp there. Or they just broke off of a rock. There were 4 of them that he thought were just natural. So that is item number 1. As far as the magical feeling when you hold something and you feel connected to someone 8,000 years ago, I think this gives me that feeling more than anything else. And I'm just so thankful to both of you for donating those to our collections, because they're so important and they're gonna be awesome in the museum. Okay, item number 2. I tried to put these roughly in chronological order. They're not perfect. Let's talk about the Gordon School. The Gordon School, you might recognize, this was its modern iteration over on Midtown and M. It was torn down, I think, 2017, if I'm getting the year right. But historically, when it was made in the mid-1800s, 1850s-ish, it was made of wood. Well, that's not what we saw. We remember seeing a brick building for all the years we've been around. Well, who remembers what happened to that wood building on September 1928? Duncan?
It was hit by a tornado.
Yes, hit by a tornado. And I know there's people in this room who haven't heard this story. I love telling this story. I tell it a lot, but there was a full class in here, and I learned about this from Ken's book and Carl's book. There was a full class in here. It was September 1928, first term teacher, Florence Seeley, I think. Wind starts kicking up, the papers start flying around, she shuts the windows, and before you know it, a tornado rips through. She gets all the kids under and around the piano, and the building collapses. And every kid survives, miraculously, because they're hiding next to the piano, which kept the wall from completely pancaking. This is currently a field over by Midtown and M. When you drive by, there's a big power box. There'll be a plaque there someday. But it's just an amazing story. Now, we get into historical accounts and how they differ. At least 1 to 2 kids were not in the building when this happened. And depending on the newspaper you read, the name changes. But the most reliable account was that a boy named Eugene Dreger, whose daughter is Marilyn in town here, and there's another daughter too living out in Fitchburg, he would tell the story to his family about how he was showing up very late that day with his new lunchbox, put his hand on the door, and was sucked back away from the building, and woke up with the doorknob in his hand. Man, if I could have had that doorknob in this collection, that would have been awesome. But there's been articles written about him, so I think that the most accurate account is probably the one that came from Eugene through his kids. And then it was rebuilt, like the little pigs, they rebuilt it in brick a year later. Oops. Oh, okay, so let's talk about the original building. What do we have from the original building? Nothing. Well, we have one thing. I want you to meet someone named Bertha Casevere. Bertha grew up, that's actually a really good sound effect, the rooster crowing from the farm.
People shut their phones off.
Bertha Casevere was the daughter of Verona Civil War veteran Frederick Casevere, who was one of our 102 or 3 Verona veterans that we have documented. She grew up on a farm over on Wayland Road. She ended up marrying a guy named Stanley West, and the West farm was over on Verona Road near where Mounds Pet Food Warehouse is. Here's some things we know about Bertha. We got this from their family histories, I think from her daughter who was interviewed. 1873 to 1957, Frederick's daughter, grew up on Wayland Road. She taught, according to her obituary, she taught in Fitchburg, Verona, and Oregon. Tracing where she was at what time, she got this certificate in 1895 from Oregon saying she'd already taught 4 years. Her family believes those 4 years were spent teaching at that Gordon School, the wooden one that would blow down 30-some years later. And they saved her bell from them, which is actually, where's the little kiddo from the back? Buddy, you want to come give this a ring? This thing rang near that school over 120 years ago. Give that thing a good ring. Go ahead, you can work it, it's cool. Isn't that cool? So this was the bell that she would ring to call the kids in. Thank you so much. What's your name, buddy? Thank you, Hunter, for doing that. So this is the bell she would ring to call the kids in the morning from recess. And this was saved in her family, like 3 or 4 jumps down. And then it was donated by Karen Rudin, who I think is her granddaughter, who was in Fitchburg several years ago. And that is number 2, which I just absolutely love. And it's fun to hear that. At some point, when we have our plaque out there, we're gonna go out in the field, we're gonna ring that sucker. And you're gonna feel a ghost, you're gonna feel a wind blow, because, I mean, that connection.
That was her real name, Case Spear?
K-Spear, I know. I would have made it through college with that name. But that was her name. And actually, when you drive into the Verona Cemetery, there's a bunch of K-Spears right on your left. I think Frederick might be there. Art, you've ever seen those, right? Yeah. Art was the sexton for a long time. Yeah, question.
That's the house that Gail grew up in.
You're kidding. Gail, you grew up in this house?
Yes, I know all about the cave bears, but I didn't know this.
Oh my gosh.
And I didn't know is a granddaughter still around?
Karen Rudin's still in, and her mom, Doris Badker Coe. Doris might be the granddaughter of Bertha and Karen. Yes, would you like to be connected with her?
Yes.
Find me afterwards. Yeah, I almost want to be like, okay, let's take a half hour on Bertha. Here you go.
Yeah.
In the case, because you grew up in this house.
Yes, I have that picture hanging on my wall.
You have that picture in your house. Okay, mind blown. Sorry, I was not prepared for this. Thank you, Gail and Ken. Thanks for pointing that out. Wow. Okay. Well, there you go. This is. Were you related, or did you just grow up in the house?
No, they. Okay, so.
I gotta put you on the spot. This is too awesome.
Okay.
There you go. Sorry, you were not
I
prepared.
can
So I
think here
can.
for a minute. So,
Here you go. You can hold it.
My, let's see, my grandpa, George Durfer, him and his wife Katie purchased this farm in 1933. And as I understand it, Case Beers were living there, but it was during the Depression, so they were losing it. So they eventually lived on the farm just to the west of that farm on Whalen. So yeah, we have a couple pictures of that time. And I often wondered, because I think the house was built sometime around the late 1800s. And I often wondered, okay, so what happened before all this time, before 1933? So this explains some of it.
Oh my gosh.
But yeah, I'd love to talk to them.
Okay.
Because we've always known that goofy name, K-Spear.
Yeah.
How does that happen?
Yeah.
So that's all.
Thank you, Gail. Wow, what a magical connection. This
Where
is the
is
fun
the
of
farm?
local history, is these little puzzles you put together.
Which
You're not
house,
even-
which house is that? on
Where is
Whalen?
it, Gail? Do you remember where it
Which
is on
house is Whalen?
Whalen? Like,
okay, so it's the farm that would be at the corner of,
So it's the old Dorfer farm?
yes, yes.
Well, that's where it
Old
is.
River Farm.
I'm Gail.
Oh, you're Gail, okay, all
Yeah,
right.
the masks.
Okay.
I know. Donna walked in last month. I didn't know she was here because of the mask. I'm like, oh my God, you were. Oh, I felt so bad. Thank you for sharing that. So we have Bertha's Bell. The farm was on Whalen Road on the corner of what?
It's at the corner of Fitcherona.
Fitcherona and
It
Whalen.
looks- The house looks the same, it's yellow now,
Oh, it's yellow. Okay,
but it's grown up.
it's okay. It's added some years to it
Yeah.
since. Great. Well, there you go. That's item number 2, the Gordon School, Dolphin, the original Gordon School. Number 3, let's talk about this awesome part of our collection. We have a couple dozen of the, this is actual size. I'm not kidding. These massive collages. Back in the early 1900s to 1940-ish, the photographer would take everybody's senior picture, then they would glue them all to a collage, then they would take a picture of that, and that's what they would sell to the kids. Well, when they were done with this big collage, those would end up at the school. And our first dedicated high school in Verona is on Marietta Street, was on Marietta Street. It's next to the senior living and the house that just got moved. Bill Kunstman Jr., who passed last year, he was class of, I think he was born in 27-ish.
He was a class of 41.
Thank you, John. He was class of 41. He remembers these collages hanging in the upper area of this. And John, do you remember them hanging in the
They were
rectangular?
hanging all around the high school.
Okay. So some of these were dumpster dives. A guy named, Duncan, what was the park next to Glacier?
Richard Tollefson.
Richard Tollefson. Thank you, Ken. When they were demolishing one of those 2 school buildings, he went in and saved a bunch of these and gave them to people who he recognized, and a lot of those have made them back to us. Also, Dean Gorell donated about a dozen of these to us when he left last year. So they're awesome, and they're huge, and they're going to be on display someday. But something stood out. When I got that box from Dean, the early ones were on cardboard. Very fragile cardboard with these, you can come up and look at these afterwards, with people's, and look at those outfits. They're wearing like dresses and suits. I think a lot of guys have Hawaiian shirts and like, on their senior pictures nowadays, it's so more casual, but here you dressed up. And when I saw this, it was exciting. It was also a little bit depressing, because seeing an old picture with no name on it kind of breaks my heart a little bit. However, if you look closer, someone at some point took a pencil to this. In the bottom corner, it says 1907. Awesome. Okay, now we have a year, assuming that person's right. And if you hold it the right way, you will see there are little pen marks, it's pen, not pencil, underneath every picture. And this is what they say. They've got partial names, but they're just pieces. Ayer, Herbig, Packard. Then we have Gooding, Packard, and John Bent. Looks like Bent. So we have two full names. Sorry, I know it's behind my stuff here. So now I got a little excited. I hopped on Find a Grave, I hopped on newspaper.com. Finding someone named Herbig in 1907 in Verona, it was impossible. So I kind of like bummer gave up. Well, at about the same time, the Lillison family had let us borrow some of their old scrapbooks to scan. And I was flipping through there and I came across this 1930 Alumni Chronicle from Verona. And it had every class going back to 1899 in it, full names.
Oh, wow.
When you go to 1907, the partial names match the full names. And now we have Mary Ayer, married Mr. E. Trump. We even know where they lived. It was John Beat, not John Bent. Catherine Donkel. Selma was her big name. Oh my God, mind blown. So now, when you line them up, it matches perfectly. We have first names, Edna, Selma, Mary. We even have some residences and married names. So that's another, talking about the puzzle of local history. If you just keep paying attention, now this can be meaningful to someone. Someone's gonna find this who's an ancestor, and they're gonna come to our museum, and they're gonna see it someday. So this to me was just so much fun. And it's kind of one of those times lost, not just the outfits, but gosh, they don't hang senior pictures. They do in Glacier Edge Elementary, they put every year a class photo up, but it's not quite the same. The full school photo, yeah. And that is number 3. Okay. Feel free to stop me if you have questions or comments. I'm gonna keep plowing forward. Number 4, I think this is one of the showpieces, if you will, of our collection, one of the centerpieces, the Gordon quilt. And here is the actual quilt. What's the story behind it though? And I invite everyone to come up here and look at names. I have a list here of all the names typed up if you want to go through them. Talking about that original school again. 1928 September, it gets destroyed by the tornado. Everybody survives, thankfully. Well, heck, now you've got a missing school, and you've got rural families who got nowhere to send their kids. So they plan to rebuild. I'm going to mention these facts are, I'm not going to say sketchy, but they vary based on the source, the exact dates and amounts, so I'll just disclaim that now. Tornado, September 14th, 1928. The district borrows what I've seen to be accounted as $6,000 to build a new brick building. But they don't borrow anything for the supplies. So talk about our community spirit in Verona. The mothers banded together and came up with this idea to create a quilt and sell signatures on it. The amount of money I've seen for the signature varies, so I didn't bother putting on here. But they sold about 150 signatures. Then they embroidered every one by hand. So as you go up and look at that, just imagine someone sitting there and doing, does anyone embroider here in this, anyone embroider in this audience? How long would it take to do 150 signatures? Is this 10 minutes, like the arrowheads, or is this like 10 hours?
No.
What would you say, Donna?
Depending upon the length of the name,
Yeah.
one name would take an hour to 2 hours.
Wow.
It depends upon how long it is and how fancy it is. And they wrote fancy back then.
They did.
So there's lots of curves and twirlies and.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Holy cow, so think of the work. When they were done, they actually auctioned off the quilt. And a guy named Emil Dreger, who I have seen being recorded as being the uncle of the little boy, Eugene, who ran out and who had the lunchbox and the doorknob in his hand, that's his uncle, won it. Well, Emil passed in 1961. 2 stories. Either his family found the quilt or a worker clearing out his house found the quilt. And they saw the name Miller on it, recognized Miller, I mean, it's in Verona, and they gave it to Charlie and Ruth Miller. Ruth Miller, around 2012, gave it to Glenn and Joan Stusser. This is before I joined this historical society, but I saw a video of him presenting you guys with it back in like 2012. So this is probably one of our, in the current iteration, one of our first artifacts that we collected. Now, this is, I was hoping this would be bigger. These are the names. Just want to put them up here in case someone recognizes. I mean, obviously the Morses, there's Morse Pond over there on north here, the Draggers. I saw is Laura. Was Laura Himsel your grandma? Yeah. Do you recognize these other names too?
My mother is Emma.
Your mother is Emma.
Um,
There's a Grace and a,
Margie is my dad's sister.
Marge is your dad's sister?
Joseph Bryan was married to Sarah.
Yeah.
Wow. Cool. There's Grubbins. Obviously, everyone recognizes the Grubbins who's been here long enough for their store, which is downtown. Some more. There's Eugene Drager, the little boy who was kind of sucked away from the building. One more page here. Virginia Marty is now Virginia Witt. We know her. She came to our tour of the Gordon School in 2017-ish.
Goals.
More Martys, Thompsons, Elmer Gordon. John, you knew him?
Sure.
The principal.
Fully grade school.
Yeah, principal of the grade school. So all these people kind of banded together and put in however much money per signature to help get the school supplies bought. And here we are. I mean, 92, 90, how many years later, you can come up and enjoy seeing this. And yeah, that is artifact number 4. So, wow, it's a lot of work that took. And such an interesting path to get here as well. That could have been, you never know, when Emil passed, what could have happened to that? I don't know. It makes you nervous to think about. Number 5. We're back to the Gordon School again. We did a tour to say goodbye to the building in, oops, I put this in the wrong order. This was our tour in 2017. We found as many of the old classmates. Anyone in here who's in this picture? Sometimes these folks come. And this was about 2 months later, that same angle and picture. So, sad moment for Verona history. I kind of already spoiled this one. My family went diving in this pile, saved a lot of stuff. There's Duncan 3 years ago. What's funny is in the new Gordon School, when they rebuilt it, they put 2 little tornado shelters in the bottom. So you kind of learn from the past, which I found out from the kids they used for like their spooky Halloween plays and things. But I definitely wanted to get a picture of that before they tore it down. What did we save? This kind of stood out. Did anyone know, let's see, Bob Porter? Bob lived here. He was the last person to own this. And his wife's name, you guys remember his wife's name? Is it, sorry, I'm having a stayed up too late moment. I'll remember in a second. Well, Bob was a town, he worked, I think that's close.
Sandy, I think.
Is it Sandy? Okay. So they lived there together and raised their kids there. They were I think, the school district sold it to someone who tried to turn it into some kind of manufacturing of ice cubes or something. That story's fuzzy. Then it went to another family who did a lot of renovating. Then it went to Bob's family. And I got to interview Bob after it was torn down to get his memories of it. Thanks, Ruth. In the rubble, I found this, and it's wallpaper with little schoolhouses on it.
Oh.
And I asked Bob, I'm like, what's the deal? And he says his wife was their interior decorator, and she put this up to kind of honor the memory of the building, which I just think was so darn cool. Because this is one of those objects, again, that shows you a change over time. It became a private residence, and then, now it's a field, but at least we have this. And I thought that was just so cool. And then this is one of the many pieces of bricks that we saved. Oops, I'm not gonna pick it up because it's holding this guy up. But what's fun is, on the bricks you can see Streator, Illinois, Streator Brick Factory, which I guess would be around 1929. But it's fun that you can still read the actual imprint. So that is number 5.
Really?
Yeah, Ruth, please. Oh, you had to bring that up. I saved more than this brick so you know how you do things and you look back and you go, man, I shouldn't have done that? Let's go back to that picture.
How many bricks does he have?
Okay, I only have about 60. I had over 800.
Oh my
Yes. I didn't know. Okay, so the building's torn down, and I know they're coming by soon to scrape it all away. And I'm like, what do I save? I also have a lot of the flooring. The flooring, there was a lot of original flooring in there, and actually, Bob Porter and his family, there was a stage the kids would perform on. That had been ripped out and drywall or plywood was over it. He found another school in Wisconsin that was being torn down, and he used its wood flooring to fix his. Really cool. So we have a lot of that wood flooring too. But I didn't know what I should save, because I was kind of new to this local history game. So I just started filling my car with bricks. I'm like, we're gonna use these for something. We'll build a patio at our museum. I made about a dozen runs with my car literally scraping down M. Aaron let me stack them double high underneath our porch in the back. They were there for about a year. Then I realized, sadly, some of them were in really good shape, but as they sat on the ground, the winter elements, bricks were not made to sit saturated in snow and ice. They're made to sit and have stuff run off of them. They started coming apart. And I realized they can't be reused. I tried to take the mortar off some of them, and it was a fool's errand. So I saved about, I don't know, 40, 50 of the best ones, and we discarded the other 760. So I shouldn't be admitting this that I throw artifacts out, but it was, you know, I didn't know what I was doing. I thought, I had too many. 800's a little bit too much. I mean, I say, well, I have lots of the good bricks that you can read, and that's just a bigger piece. So we have plenty of bricks. What's that? Oh, Ruth is referencing, we also have a brick collection from things like the Sharp House, that old high school, the Myers House. We save bricks from as many places. The house on PD, west of M, that was torn down about 2 years ago. I'm just blanking on the family. There was an old brick Foursquare. So we do have a brick collection, and I keep most of them. It's just, in this case, it was my bad. It's a fun story to tell. I should have put a picture of that in here. My deck with I thought we could reuse them. I realized we couldn't. Yes, John gave us bricks from the old high school and from the Sharp House and the asylum that you remember coming in on Bourne Avenue. We had bricks from that as well. Okay, let's talk about, now this is something where I'm going to turn it over to John. I've always been fascinated with the idea of rationing in World War II. It's such a community effort it took and a cooperation. I had never seen one of these ration books in real life until this was donated in January of last year. John, can you tell us, you remember these, can you tell us a little bit about how this rationing worked? Because your dad had to deal with this running his own restaurant.
Well, not only my dad had to deal with it as a proprietor of a restaurant, but every individual had a ration book. I still have my wife's ration book and meat stamps, sugar stamps, and so forth, which I'll donate to you one of these days when I get around to it. Everybody was assigned a ration book, and certain items in the grocery store were, of course, rationed. Some of those I just mentioned: meat, sugar, coffee, gasoline for your automobile was rationed. Tires, there weren't any. They were not making tires for the general public, only for the military. And so any time you bought a particular item, along with it went whatever stamp was required for that particular item or that weight, whatever the case might be. And of course, if you ran out of ration stamps for the month, well, you were out of those particular items.
You mentioned the black market, John. You said in your book people would come to your dad.
Yeah, black market was a formidable business in this country during World War II. There was a merchant in Middleton who had an illegal slaughterhouse, and he used to come by our establishment and want to sell my dad meat. You never knew if it was beef, a cow, or a horse, or a mule, you know. Who knew what it was? Well, he promptly kicked the guy off the premises every time he came, but he didn't ever quit. Eventually, that fellow was tried and convicted and went to Waupun State Prison for his activities. Not particularly because he came to the Eagle's Nest to sell meat, but he was doing it all over. So people started to hoard things, Especially sugar was a big item to hoard because at canning time in the fall, they wanted to make sure they had plenty. And so hoarding was looked down on, but a lot of people did it anyway. But basically, that's the way it worked, and there was a commission. Every state had a commission, and for our restaurant, my dad had to
Both. Covered both
submit
cameras.
a menu to the commission, giving the prices of certain items, and you were not allowed to increase the price during the war. And if you did, it was a violation. One particular time, my dad was totally embarrassed and had to go in front of a hearing. Someone reported that he had charged them 35 cents for a ham sandwich, in which he was only allowed to charge 30 cents. He did not ever know if it was correct or it was just an error or whatever, but he was required to go and appear before the commission. So it was a very strict kind of thing, and people behaved pretty well. Basically, I think that's. The individual little stamps were all colored based on the item that they required. Of course, meat was red, I do remember for sure, but there were other colors. There were blue and green and yellow. I think yellow was gasoline, but I'm not positive of that. But that's kind of thing.
Thank you, John. I was going to be in trouble if you didn't come to this meeting, because this is John's slide. I can't tell this. Thank you for sharing those memories, John. Bill Koosman Jr., who fought in World War II, would get annoyed when I would use the term greatest generation or sacrifice. He'd be like, come on. But I have such a crazy deep respect for anyone who went through this time when people had to really pull together like that. And when I was presented with this object as a donation, I got the chills. And this was actually, did anyone know Jean Doubler? Yeah, she sadly passed, I think in January of 20, I might have the year wrong. I'm sorry, I have the year wrong. That might be 2021. I might have it wrong, let me check that later. But her daughter, Pat Vollenweider, who was a teacher, donated these to us in January of 2021. Gave me chills, and then when you read them, on the back it says, do not pay more than the agreed on price, do not pay less, and if you lose this book, we're not giving you your next one. So when you hold this and you're like, oh my God, if someone lost this, they weren't getting sugar, gas, and all that stuff the next month. So if you want to come up and look at them, I have a couple of them here, and I have one of them opened up too, so you can see the stamps with the different colors. Yeah, Lynn, do you have a question?
So was it something that came to the head of the household, or did children get their own?
Yeah, everybody got one.
In fact, Jean was the kid in this family. So she had her own book. Mabel was her mom. Eugene was her dad. So, and I assume these were the last of many books. Strangely enough, no one wrote a date on them. I guess you would just, why would you think? Yeah, Mary.
I still got one that my mom had when she was living in Madison,
Does it still have stamps in it?
probably.
That's amazing. Wow, I guess these were one of those things that like one day was common, and now today I had literally never seen one. And here's a close-up of some of the stamps. I guess you can't really see the picture, the color, sorry, on here, but a lot of them still had stamps in there. Thank you so much, John, for sharing that. That's gonna look great in the display if you want to come and see. We got up here. Okay, did Jane come? Jane's not here, is she? We're gonna scoot forward about 3 decades now. We're gonna hop into the 70s. And I have a clip. This is the first video clip I am going to attempt to play off of Duncan's laptop. Thank you, Duncan. Off my son's laptop.
Technically yours, I just use it more than anyone else in the
Yep, don't forget that. Legally, it's mine. You're right. All right, I want to play a quick clip from the inauguration, well, no, that's the right word, from the ceremony marking when Verona became a city in 1978. And I want you to pay attention to details. There's that favor. That's John Hold on. There's someone I recognize there. Who's that tall guy there? Who's that tall guy? There he is. There's Art. Hey, everyone. There's Art. Art was one of our first elder persons, too, along with Jane. Let me go. So I think, so they pretty much swear him in. You get to see him a little bit closer up. Here's where they go through each one and they haven't said their name. There's Art. Then here's Jane, who was our first female elder person for the city of Verona. I like this picture because there's so much contrast in this image. It's not just the fact that one's a man and a woman, but I'm going to talk about why I think the dress is such an interesting artifact. Let me pop on back to my PowerPoint. And Jane was our guest about 4 years ago when we had Jane, Art, and John Perkins come up and talk about that first council and their memories of becoming a city. Okay, so why save a dress? Why save this awesome pink dress? Here are some pictures from that event. In fact, there's the camera of the guy shooting the video we just saw. 1978. A little bit of a timeline here. Verona, as Ken mentioned, became a town in 1847, became a village in 1921. Jane's family moved to Madison in 65, and then moved to Verona in 72. 78, we became a city. Art, you correct me here. I have heard one of the main drivers of us becoming a city was we were afraid if we didn't, Madison would annex us to oblivion.
That was one of the fears that a lot of people had, yeah.
Here, go, you see that mic?
That was one of the fears a lot of people had. I don't know if that really would have happened,
Yeah.
at least not right away.
Who was the person that kind of was the driver of this?
Vince Weiland.
Vince Weiland.
Or not, I mean Vince Weiland's dad.
Vince Weiland's dad, Burr. Cool. Thanks.
He was a driver.
So Burr Weiland was one of the drivers to get people organized to become a city. Happened in 78. There was this big ceremony. This is in the gym of what was the K-Wing, now by the cemetery, the lower part of the high school, and now is it New Century now? I forget which school it is. They all changed last year. I interviewed Jane a couple weeks ago about this moment, because when I watched this clip, her dress really stood out to me. Is that you've got, okay, no offense, Art, boring blue suit, boring black suit, oh, another boring blue suit, bright pink dress. And it just happens to be the first female elder person. But there were other differences too, I think, between Jane and the rest of the council. When I interviewed her, she told me that she actually grew up, was lightly involved in politics in college as a young Republican. Then by a couple decades later, she switched on the spectrum and she identified herself as one of the more liberal Democrat members of our early council. Art, would you agree with that? He's nodding his head. So there was kind of an ideological difference too, not just a gender difference in this first council. And I think it shows there. When I asked her why she ran, this was the quote that she had. She thought, you know, it's time we have a city mother, not just city fathers. So she thought she would run. Here are pictures in color, so you can see that contrast in outfits, which I think is, and I said, Jane, am I reading too much into this if I were to say, you knew your political spectrum was different, you're the only woman, so you wanted to stand out? She's like, yeah, you're reading too much into that. It's like, darn it. I don't care. I'm gonna make that connection anyways. It's just too convenient. And she did, oops. I asked her how she picked that dress, and she has not worn it since. It's been hanging in her house since that day, and here it is today. I said, how'd you pick it? And this is what she said. You know, I asked someone, nobody told me what to wear. I figured it's a fancy event, so I wore the dress. And then I got there and I thought, maybe a little overdressed. So we have this as an audio interview. I didn't have time to get it in the slide, but what I really like about this, other than the things I've mentioned already, is there was a difference in local politics, and maybe politics in general at that time, where she said her and Ed Faber were two of the first council people. They didn't agree on anything. They would argue and they would vote against each other just for the sake of voting against each other. But then afterwards, they were drinking buddies. They would go down to the dugout and they'd have a great time, and they had this great respect for each other. And she had that with several other people on the council, even though she was kind of the standout politically, or the kind of, I don't want to say odd person out, but, and I think that kind of respect is cool. Don't you wish that people could argue today about their political beliefs and then go have a beer together and be cool? That was happening back then. Art, were you at the dugout some of those nights too?
No, I didn't go to the dugout.
You didn't go to the dugout? Andy, pause the tape real quick. Art, were you at the dugout?
Not with.
Just kidding.
I went to the dugout, but not with.
Not with the, with the group, okay. So anyways, to me, this artifact kind of captures that moment where we become a city and we have this kind of cool fact there. She did think that Paula Hefty may have been an alder person or a town council person on the town before that. So Jane said, I might not have been the first woman to do it, but I was the first one for the city. And I checked Paula's obituary and it did say she was on the town board. I've been trying to figure out what that was. Yeah, Art.
Probably village board, actually.
Oh, did I say village board? Thank you. I should have said village board.
Probably village board.
Yeah.
Paula was really integral in getting Verona to become a city, because Verona had to do a special census before that happened.
So you're saying Paula helped us become a city because we needed a census? Go ahead.
And Paula spearheaded the special census so we would have accurate numbers.
Yeah.
And then we would have numbers so we could divide the city into wards. And anyway, she was pretty active in that, and I give her a lot of credit for that.
Yeah. Sounds like another person we might want to do a meeting about at some point. Great. A couple other quotes that Jane mentioned was, she was also on the school board, and she said that was way worse because when you're on the school board, everything's life or death for everyone who comes in and yells at you about stuff because it's their kid. And she said, being in politics is like, if you can't hit me this time, I'll come around again. Being one of those ducks in a shooting gallery, because if they don't whack you the first time, you'll keep spinning around. She had she's very quotable and a very healthy opinion of the world of politics, which I thought was very inspiring. And I asked her, she talked about meetings where she would leave and people would be following her to her car screaming at her. And I said, how did you put up with that? And this was her quote, which is, you have to know you're making the decision that you think is right because you believe in something, and that's just how politics works. I thought, wow, that's amazing. So, yeah, Jane Piercy's dress, there it is. Okay, another Verona fierce female, if you will, that is worth remembering. Another person from the Matz family. I want to introduce you to someone named Minnie May, but I'm going to kind of give you an anchor point here. We all know the Matz house, 1848-ish, in Verona. Josiah Matz family built it, were the first people to purchase that part of town from the government. This is a picture of it a long, long time ago. That's Lydia, his wife. They had a son, William J.L. Matz, who was one of our, we think, 3 Verona Civil War veteran POWs. He grew up in that house. He married, I'm forgetting Cluett. I'm forgetting your first name, I'm sorry. And they had many kids, and what's really sad is we think Matt's family records, and Sally and your family have kept amazing records, which we have copies of. These 2 folks lost 3 kids within a week of each other in 1880 to diphtheria, which suggests there might have been some kind of local diphtheria outbreak. And they lost another kid 6 months, a few years later. But they did have several kids who did survive through adulthood. One of them is this interesting person, Minnie May Matz. Minnie, here's what we know about Minnie. She was born in Verona in 1874. She taught elementary school in Verona. One of her personal artifacts is a little signature book by a lot of kids in the 1890s saying how much they love their teacher in school and stuff. It's very sweet. Her life calling was to become a nurse. Specifically, she seems to have been inspired by getting training for fighting tuberculosis. And for 6 years, in the early 1900s, she was down in Panama during the building of the Panama Canal as a nurse. During this time, and these are from Matt's family records, I haven't been able to find like official documentation or stuff, but here are some hospitals she was stationed at. This fellow here, I forget, is it Gorgas or Gorgeous? I don't know how to say his name. He was a person sent down there. The French had tried, sorry, side note, the French had tried to build the Panama Canal. Yellow fever kept wiping out their workers by the thousands. The US took over in the early 1900s, and this guy went down there with some recent research suggesting it was mosquitoes causing it. And he implemented a series of changes that pretty much eradicated yellow fever from the region in the next couple of years. That's when Minnie was down there as a nurse. I think that's a really cool overlap between Verona and a world event. She came back, was a registered nurse, and then she wasn't done. She was a World War I nurse in France during World War I in 1917. And we have artifacts of Minnie. So the Matz family donated personal effects of Minnie. I have several of them here. We have some communications from her time in the army over in France. We have I'll show you a picture. I can give a picture of this. After the war, she was a nurse in Edgerton, then in Waukesha County, and sadly, she died, I think at 51-ish, from surgery complications in Waukesha, and that's where she's buried. Gosh darn it, her dad outlived her by 2 years. So when I saw this, I'm like, oh, please tell me that he didn't go before his dad. But sadly, William, his last residence was that house 2 down from Plumbing and Glass that the doll clothes shop was in a couple of years ago. I forget what's in there right now. That's where he lived towards the end of his life. But she passed before him by a couple of years. One of my favorite things, another kind of give you chills things. So these are the Minnie May artifacts you can come look at. She was active in the Legion afterwards. She did all the volunteer stuff with kids with disabilities and such. One of them is this little note card, and it says, sorry I didn't get a blow up. This is to certify that my daughter Minnie May Matz was born in Verona, Wisconsin, Dane County, May 1st, 1870, can't read the year, signed William G.L. Matz, father, Verona, Dane County, Wisconsin. So her dad made her this little hand-drawn birth certificate. Maybe she was born at home, you know, for some reason in 1918. In fact, that's right around the time, around the time of the war. So come up and look at those. So Minnie's a very interesting character, or a personality from Verona. William G.L. died 2 years later. Yeah, and I really squeezed when Sally and Alan would come to our meetings, I tried to squeeze every drop of Minnie May information out of them I could. I'm still hoping I find that awesome newspaper article or something that even fleshes out her character even more, but we know she was in the community service helping kids, dedicated her life to being a nurse, and was at two very important historical events worldwide. So I think that makes her something we should remember and celebrate. Okay, we're getting down there. Number 9. This might bring back some memories for some folks. It is my next video clip. This sounds a little weak, but this is from, I think, the 1960s. There was no date on it. Might have been late 50s. And tell me if this sounds familiar for anyone.
People have embarked upon the same experience in survival. Aware of the location of the nearest public shelter. Know where this sign is in your neighborhood, for it designates public and privately owned buildings being used for community shelters, marked and licensed with the consent of their owners. Food, water, sanitation supplies, medical kits, radiological monitoring equipment. In sum, just enough supplies to meet your basic needs.
So those are the public ones. Now here's just 30 seconds on a home shelter.
In the suburbs. In the wake of disaster, you and members of your family are entering upon your own experience in survival, in your own home shelter. Pre-stocked with food and water supplies, enjoying certain comforts denied those who will live out this period in a public shelter, but wholly dependent on your own decisions. In fact, strictly on your own for your existence until it is safe for you to leave the shelter.
So it goes on about preparing your own home nuclear fallout shelter. And this is one of those, geez, these videos give me a little bit of chills too, just to think that this was real. And they have a lot more video of the kids sitting in there reading their books and playing their games while they're waiting for the radioactive haze to like settle. Did anyone have one of these or know anyone who had a home shelter? Or does this stoke any memories from anybody who lived through this period? I'm always fascinated to hear.
Stu. I lived off of Old Middleton Road when I grew up, and there were some people, if you would come down Old Sauk Road towards Old Middleton and go straight up the hill, take the driveway straight up the hill, there were some people named Schumann there. And when I was a kid, they built a fallout shelter, and their son John and I were good friends, and I remember going up there and playing in that fallout shelter. Yeah.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
So what year's worth was that with you?
So, let me pop on over. I tried to, if you Google nuclear scare US, it's very frightening to see how many there have been. So I'm not sure what time or what when that video was from, but I tried to nail down a little bit of a timeline here. And I'll talk about it through this building. So where I'm going with this is, plumbing glass building, I need to update this now to EZ Plumbing as of last year. This building is awesome. It's been so many interesting things throughout Vernona's past. It was a couple of blacksmiths, the older building, which is this down here, that's from Ken's book again. The current building's from 22, it was an auto shop, it was the Backer Blacksmith Shop. Peter's Feed and Seed, paint and glass and plumbing and glass. It's been so many things. Here's an older picture of it. Well, when 2017-ish, I got to meet the owners of Plumbing and Glass, Ken and Joyce Budzak, and Ken has sadly passed last year. And Joyce is the one who sold the business to Easy Plumbing last year. I had heard from Art that in their basement they still had these. Legit, actual fallout signs, still on the wall where they were placed back in the, and I'm sorry, I tried to research to see when these were made. There were so many of them made over so much time, I'm not sure exactly when it was. But that was a place that was locally designated as a fallout shelter. And I took pictures of them up on there. There's behind some pipes and stuff, plumbing things. So this is an interesting connection. That would have been the place we go, you know, if World War III had happened, plumbing and glass would have been a safe place. But there's another piece to this story too, as far as the nuclear scare in the nuclear area. So I guess, sorry, I don't going to answer your question. I'm not sure exactly when it was from. There they are. When we first toured the Davidson house over by the Sugar River on 69, 3 or 4 years ago, there's Ruth going down the old rickety stairs. This building goes back to the 1860s. Very cool, creepy basement, some forgotten fireplaces down there. Hanging on the wall was a home fallout protection guidebook to how to prepare your own fallout shelter in your house from the US government. And that was something that we were able to acquire after the building went into public hands. I've got it up here. It's super fragile because I think it was kind of a wider basement. It's up here if you want to come in there, at least look at the outside. But just to show you, this one is from 1967. So I got a date on that. This is 5 years after the Cuban Missile Crisis, one of the biggest nuclear scares we've had, obviously. So 67, you open it up, and there you've got Lyndon Johnson telling you you've got to be prepared. It's very important that everyone can take care of ourselves if we need to. Time distance shielding will help save you in a nuclear war. You can do something. Then some of this stuff is both terrifying and kind of humorous. They talk about how you could work your fallout shelter in your everyday life. Like, hey, check it out. A snack bar built of brick or block can be converted into a fallout shelter in a short period of time by lowering a strong hinge false ceiling to rest the snack bar. It tells you how to make a snack bar so you can quickly convert it into a fallout shelter. Both funny and terrifying. It's one of those things that kind of works in both ways. So yeah, this is our small little bit of a nuclear scare era Verona history section right there. All right, number 10. Oh boy, what do you guys think of the last couple of years? What do we save? How do we tell someone 100 years from now what this was like? What would you pick? Think about it, like seriously, what would you grab? Because I've been thinking about this for a couple of years. Masks, yep, we've got some homemade masks.
Dance class instruments, bell covers, which I still haven't gotten around anymore, but they're not stopping using them.
Yep, in the school they put bell covers over the trumpets and stuff. So many things have happened, and actually when this all started, I'm like, oh, this is gonna take, in these next 2 months, I gotta grab lots of artifacts. And then June came. When June came last year and the mask mandate ran out, I scrambled to grab as many mask signs as I could from every Verona business I could. And I was like, we have them. And then when they all came back in August, I'm like, I'm not doing that again. We've got artifacts from the first run. This one we can forget about. Just kidding, we're not gonna forget about it. But there is something up here that I felt was very important to save. When the schools closed down on March 13th was the Friday, the last day we had schools. Then suddenly you were remote. Luckily we had iPads. Then suddenly it became a month. Then suddenly it was going to be the year. Some of the schools banded together and did these teacher parades where they had the teachers decorate their cars and drive through the neighborhoods. It had only been like 8 or 9 weeks at that point. It felt like it had been a lifetime. Wouldn't you say, Duncan? Like, because going to school every day and then 9 weeks felt like it had been 10 years. And it was so exciting as a parent and as kids to go and see these things. I found them inspiring. And I have a very short, this is a 50-second clip or so, of the Glacier Edge one going through a part of Verona. This is on May 7th, 2020, so not even 2 months after the close down. Because remember, we couldn't get close to people. You had to stay, it was so terrifying that this is the closest you got to your teachers. All right, pay attention to this next one here. After this one, after this. Right there. Let me pause it.
Oh.
So that's Mr. DeBrew. He's an elementary school teacher, and he's holding a sign from Glacier Edge. He's holding a sign that says, he's holding this sign. In this together with GE for Glacier Edge School. My kids both went to Glacier Edge, and I cried when I saw this. And I knew I wanted to save stuff from this parade, because it would be historically relevant. But when I saw that, and this was like week 7. This was when we were all in it together, like as a society, you know. Now not so much, but the schools especially have remained strong through this time. And that's just something I knew we need to have, because that's going to tell the story. And he wrote me a couple paragraphs about what inspired him to make it, how to make it. And let me pop out of this video. So that's my answer to what do you save? Something that makes you cry and makes you happy at the same time.
Jesse, can I say something?
Yeah, please.
I have a friend who teaches music in elementary school in McFarland. And she said that,
Oh, here, Lisa here.
I have a friend who teaches elementary school music in McFarland, and she said that last week, somebody brought in a picture of the Titanic going down, and the teachers were the orchestra on the end, hanging on to the bitter end. And she said that's how we all feel. It's just awful.
They were the Oh my God, who would have thought this would go on for this many years? So what else do we save? We didn't just save this sign. Okay, so you saw this, Miss Vaughn from Glacier Edge. We got all of her decorations from her car. Those are all cataloged. Those hand-drawn signs that every business hastily made saying we're closed, we got several of those. This one's from Co Insurance. There's the sign from Mr. DeBrew. I got, oh, I forgot to bring this one. In May, when they opened up the playgrounds again, I grabbed as much of the caution tape as I can, because that's one of those chilling pictures looking back. And a lot of these 6-foot distancing signs. We now have in our collections, as well as, I liked all the inspiring things that showed up in businesses and home windows. So we have all the things you see here we've got, and then homemade masks. And then when the kind of controversy started over keeping kids at home, we've got several of from the protest that December and some of the yard signs. So actually we've got a pretty decent collection. So maybe 10 years from now, we'll do our COVID 10, assuming it's over by then, we'll do our look back at COVID. We've got a pretty darn good documented collection. And then I mentioned that last day of the first mask mandate, I went and grabbed everything I could. There's AJ at AJ's Pizza. He donated his mask right off his face. I'm like, hey, here, take it. He gave me his sneeze shield that all the businesses had to put up back when we thought that actually did something. This is Avanti's. This is the bathroom in the brewing company. So that is the COVID. Okay, we're down to the last 2 here, guys.
Hey, Jesse?
Yeah.
At some point, our vaccination cards.
Oh, vaccination cards? I'm keeping mine unfolded for the collection. So everyone save your vaccination cards when we no longer need them. I want them. I want every one of them. I mean, I could just buy fake ones online now, but it'd be better to get your real ones.
And Jesse, I would, if I were you, I would print out the email you sent, which would be 2 years ago at the end of next month, about not having this anymore because of COVID. That would be something you could put in there. It gives a date.
Yeah, especially for our own historical society history, which is something I forget to document a lot. Okay, now we're getting to the last 2. These are very recent acquisitions. 420 Church Avenue is nearly done being demolished right now. Sadly, it was the most recent home of Sugar Creek. It was the Verona Grade School, started in the 50s, was added on to in the 60s and 77. 2000, they added the gym. I got permission from the city and Public Works to go in there mid-December. This is after they remediated all the lead and asbestos, but before they started the demolition. And here are some of the pictures of the places I went through. Here's the gym torn up to the floor. This is the cafeteria. The fire department had been practicing, so a lot of their water had made the ceiling tile soggy, which had collapsed. And now here's that question again, what do you save? The school districts stripped darn near everything that wasn't bolted down out of that building. But I found some stuff. I did get some things. So this is the way to the step room. Anyone go to this school? I went to this school in elementary school. Yeah, Liz, you went there? Ken, you went there?
It was much smaller though,
It wasn't quite as big.
the original part.
Do you remember the step room? Did they have the step room while you were there?
No,
Oh. I was there in the 80s in the step room. What's that?
there was no step room.
No step room. Did that one for you, Liz?
Well, no, I was gonna say, my class, when I was in high school, I was in the building trades class.
Yeah.
My class built the garage on the back of it.
Can you say that again?
So when I was in high school, I was the only girl in building trades, and as part of our project, this was, I believe, the intro to building trades. The full building trades, they would build a house. I was in the one before that, and we built a garage off the back of the
What year was that
elementary
about?
school, early 80s.
Cool. Thanks. Yeah, Ken.
Yeah, the original part was detached from, the original part was detached from the original red brick school. And in first grade, I kind of remember the steel structure going up, but it was like it was just the straight part in front. I think there were 8 classrooms, and the gym, they called it the all-purpose room, I think was the sign on it. That was the original part, and then it was added on about 1 billion times after that.
Which is how it ended up this kind of interesting snaking building that they couldn't repurpose with the new project. So what did we grab? The step room for me was what I remember, just the main community area where you would have assemblies. It was in that step room that they changed the name to Sugar Creek and named Storer Prairie in like 88, 89-ish. The gym, I got a piece of the gym floor there. Someone had cut samples away. I don't know what they were looking for when they were doing mitigation. These cool old speakers, which I talked to Todd Bruner. I interviewed him a week later to find out his story. So these didn't work anymore, but they were still on the walls, and who knows what years these were used. But I had to grab one of those because they're just kind of cool. The gym floor, this is from 2000, still the floor from then. The bells still work. They still use these bells. And here's one of them. This is the one you're seeing in that picture, by the way. Still used to start school, end school. There were one room, the Spanish room, had some personal items on there from the kids, with little Post-its they'd drawn for this activity. Saved those. Got a couple of the lockers from the old part of the building. Then, found a desk. Gosh, I wanted one so bad, but they were gone. Up in the utility room, a desk had been put up there, maybe because they had to fix it, the lid wasn't shutting. And when I told Todd that, he's like, "We missed a desk, where was it?" I said, "I don't know, who's asking?" He's like, "Don't worry, you're not gonna you can keep it." I said, "Oh, it was up in the utility room. That's this desk right here." And I love this. I think the kids, Duncan, do they still have desks like this?
At my old school.
At Glacier they did?
Yeah, but it was just for my 4th and 5th grade that I remember.
Yeah.
And they were a lot different chairs than that, I remember.
Todd said that he's been there since 06, 04, and these desks predate him. It's all about trapezoidal tables now. They can configure them and they have chairs, but so this desk is at least older than 20 years. I seem to remember these when I was going there in the 80s. But what's interesting is they made a comeback. He said when COVID hit and when kids started going back into schools, these became more popular because you had to distance the kids. So you couldn't put 2 or 3 at a table, you had to start using the desk. So interesting little COVIDing on that. And then this chair here, he said they put tennis balls on there, not scratch the floors. And he said in 20 years, he can't believe the kids never ripped these off and started throwing them at each other. And now I'm saying this on camera, so if this happens in a Verona school, it's my fault.
I think I only remember one instance of elementary school where people actually took the tennis balls off the chair itself.
So your school, they were a little less well-behaved.
They just
Here's the
took it
chair.
off and then put it somewhere, and all the
Yeah.
other times it just fell off because they'd often crack and then.
Oh, okay. So they weren't actually
But no
practicing their
one-
serves in the hallway.
No one ever threw them at each other.
Side note, because I think it's hilarious, Todd said that in this building, he can't believe this, but all of the circuits were in the main hallways in unlocked boxes at lower level. He says any kid who realized this in 20 years could have shut us down. Gone through there and flipped all those switches, but no one ever did. Last thing I want to mention, I came across this. If you read my email, you saw this. They took a lot of the whiteboards. They left this one, which has the schedule from March 13th, 2020 on it. This was the day COVID closed down the schools. And you've got a full schedule here. You've got community meeting coming up in April 9th. I don't think that one happened. This was kind of frozen in time. And I saw that, oh my God, we have to keep that. It's 8 foot. It's not 800 bricks from the Gordon School, but it is 8 foot by 4 foot. Ring, ring, ring. Aaron? can you bring the big car? It kind of fit. So how do you save it? There's no good way to preserve this. I didn't bring this today, but basically, we built a frame out of plexiglass and wood so that it won't, I mean, it's whiteboard, you touch it, it blows off. Another item to say that'll tell the story of this building, especially at the end. A few more things I kept: step room, carpet, hooks. I did not take this water bubbler because I couldn't get it off the wall. Not because it weighed 100 pounds and would have been silly, but I left that one there. And that's, all right, very last item. I have a 1-minute video clip to bring us all home. Because 2 years ago, I didn't know what these items are, what these were, and I'm talking about this. And don't be afraid. Who does not know what this is? Anyone not know what this is? Yeah, I didn't know either, buddy. Yeah, Rosa, if you would have shown me this, I'd have been like, well, it's something cool and old. Then I figured out what it was, and then we got that donated this last year. Let me play this clip. Here is how, before you had an elevator, how you would get hay up into your hayloft.
With the drop pulley coming down, fastened to the iron claw or chain fork, which was developed especially.
Side note, I just want to mention, we have one of these too, this exact model that we got from Barb's Barn. I just couldn't get it in the car this morning, you'd be seeing it as well. So side note, sorry about that. Okay.
When baled hay came into use, the load ascends into the track, the drop pulley fastened to the hay fork. As that
there it is, it's up there at the top, that's the trolley.
Across the hay mow, and when the farmer in the hay mow yells, drop it, a trip rope is pulled, and this rope goes to the outside and releases the fork, which drops the hay load into the hay mow. Here's a good heavy load of bales. They're turning that so that the drop pulley will fit into the carrier. Releases.
There you go. And I know from when I mentioned this a few months ago that Laura used to use this. Laura, were you the person who drove the horse, you said?
I pulled the rope back.
You pulled with the horse?
Horse trailer back to the barn.
Yeah.
So it could be hooked on.
And Art, did you use one of these too? Yeah. Gene, do you have a question?
I have a comment. Yeah, I remember these from, I was up in Wisconsin Rapids, but my uncle would do the fork on one end. My grandfather was on the other end, and I was driving the tractor at that time, not a horse.
Yeah.
And then my grandpa had to pull the rope back, you know, as I backed the tractor back up for the next load. But I ran him down one day, because I was too little to really run this tractor. I was only like 10 or something. I mean, but I got it stopped in time before I ran him over.
Oh, thank goodness.
You know, so farming is not, you know, it's not for the weak.
In fact, I think that's the plaque we're going to put as farming, not for the weak. So it's just a cool piece of late 1800s, first half of the 1900s farm technology that's obviously not in use anywhere. And I learned about these a couple of years ago, and then I got the claw from Barb's Barn, but we didn't have one of these trolleys. People call them hay trolleys or barn trolleys, it varies. But man, did I want one. And I do have to thank Werner Elmker, who made that video. I found this on YouTube. Then the Thompson family, Dale and Julie, emailed me this last summer and said, we have a lot of artifacts from the Thompson family barns. And this was in there. And it's like, oh, barn trolley. We needed one of these so bad for our collections. Well, note on the Thompson family, I'm curious if anyone knew some of these folks. I think, John, you knew Bert and Pearl.
Yeah, they were, I had an uncle of my wife.
Oh, and uncle of your wife's. So just to get you guys oriented, this is Nine Mound Road here. This is West Verona Avenue. So the new high school is somewhere around, well, the 3 apartment buildings in front of the high school are like in this area. And this is a 1947 map. Bert and Pearl's farm was up here on Nine Mound. Marv, who Ruth interviewed several years ago, was his son who married Dolores Cookie, known as Cookie Co. Thompson. And then their son, Dale, and Julie are the ones who donated this wonderful artifact, and several other artifacts too. A couple of notes, there's the trolley. John, you painted this picture, didn't you? This is of Bert and Pearl's farm. I'm sorry this is too dark to see, but this is so cool. If you go just south of Edward, their driveway is still there. Someone's got their old driveway that went around their house and barn, now goes to someone's shed next to the first house on Edward and 911. I lined it up with the satellite picture, the aerial photo to make sure it was, but I just love that stuff when you can actually go and see that. Then Marv, around 1957, George Drives, who was also mentioned in John's book. He used to hang wallpaper at the Eagles Nest, I think, George Drives, didn't he? He passed, and Marv bought his farm, and then him and Dolores had a farm there, raised a family there. And this is currently where those 3 apartments are-ish that are in front of Union High School. Here is a little picture, an aerial photo, painting, and what's cool is the old barn from Bert, at some point, maybe 60s or 70s, they moved it and attached it to the barn that was there on Marv's farmhouse there. They still have the what do you call the thing on top of the chicken on that shows you the way the wind's blowing? Oh my God, I gotta stop, guys, I'm losing it. The weather vane, thank you. They still have the weather vane. They donated this barn trolley, an old phone that used to hang in the barn, and it's just an amazing collection of artifacts. Well, they saved the cupola, but I think it's a little too big for us to store. I've measured all the doors in every place I could find to store it, which is unfortunate because it's amazing, the cupola that was on top of this classic barn. And there's Dale and Julie donating some of the other items this summer. Yeah, they're not here, are they? Dale, Julie? Okay, good, because otherwise I'd put them on the spot. And that's it, y'all. Thanks, sorry I went a little bit long. What's next? Well, we are going to approve some funds to get more archival safe. Everything you're seeing up here is archival safe, but you saw a lot of plastic tubs in my picture. We got to replace those with archival safe materials if we're going to hold things in there long term. We're going to keep our eyes peeled for a display space. Maybe it's a rented room, maybe it's a room in the graded school, but I think within the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to have a place where you're going to come and see stuff like this. And that is the end of the presentation. Any other questions? Yeah, little guy. Was it Hunter? There you go, Hunter. There you go, Hunter.
I go to Sugar Creek.
You do? All right. Did you go to the old building too?
No.
Or what grade are you in?
I'm in 3rd grade.
Oh, you're 1st grade? Oh, so your kindergarten was digital, huh? Oh, how's it going there?
Good.
Nice. Do you have desks like that?
No.
Oh, you don't? Are they all tables?
They're just like regular desk.
Have you seen, when you walk in, the history display Mr. Bruner made of all the old books and stuff? Have you noticed that? It might be a little high for your vantage point. Does that sound familiar? He's got some old stuff from the school. Well, do you know your principal, Mr. Bruner?
Yes.
If you want to make him your best friend, ask him about the history of Sugar Creek. Sound good?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Hunter. Mr. Bruner loves talking about history. Well, thank you, everybody. I'll cut you loose. Please come up and see the artifacts. If your hands are clean and you want to ring the bell, you want to spin the wheel, if you want to put the dress on, I don't know about that one. But everybody coming up. No, okay, who's this saying no? No, don't wear the dress? Okay, I'll just make that close. Great. Thanks, everybody.